Waking up this morning and I can confirm that the smile on my face was just as big as Luke's from UTV podcast because Forest did end up beating Aston Villa. But what are the 5 key things we learned from yesterday's performance? Welcome to the video. Good afternoon, everyone, and I hope you are still smiling and happy clapping away as yes, Forest did beat Aston Villa yesterday. And welcome to the video where we'll be talking about the 5 key learning points we had from yesterday. We'll be covering off Aina. Is he the best free signing of all time? We'll be talking about the #1 goalkeeper situation. We'll cover off Steve Cooper's tactics as he got them spot on in my opinion yesterday, and plenty of other things. And don't forget tonight at 7 p.m, the new fixed time for Beat the Drop. And we got a full house and some special guests on top of that. So make sure you're tuned in for that at 7 p.m. But let's jump into this video after, of course, you've hit that like button, subscribed if you are new. And let's start. Well, there's only one place to start in my opinion, and that's with Ola Aina. I remember that final game against Crystal Palace and Lodi saying his goodbyes, and at the Arsenal game, the tears and everything. And I thought, how are we going to replace Lodi, that quality Brazilian left back? Little did I know that a freebie in the summer from a person who was playing in France, who had previously been at Chelsea and Fulham, would suddenly turn up and cause such a good stir in the team. What I love the most about Aina for me is the versatility. Yes, we have Nico Williams who can play left back and right back, or right wing back, left wing back, whatever you want to tag it as. But I think Ola Aina is on a different level. He's got pace, he's got power, and on top of that, he's got an eye for goal, because that finish yesterday was sublime. I don't think, and I mean this with all due respect, that many of our actual team, the Forest team, could have finished that as cleanly as he did yesterday. I think a lot of them, and not just Forest, let's broaden the spectrum here. A lot of Premier League players would have just laced it, leathered it, and probably sent it into the Bridgeford end. And the way he was composed and came onto the ball was absolutely fantastic. But it's not just his goal that impressed me, it's his work rate. The way he got up and down that pitch, was never caught in front of the ball or behind the ball, always in the right place at the right time. And this is a player, I think he was our first signing of the summer, that honestly, had you ever heard of? And if you had heard of him, was he on your radar to be signed? And I think he comes and he can produce a role that is much needed in the team. For whatever reason, we're still getting loads of injuries this season, including actually Aina. But every time he's been on the pitch, he's been at least nominated for me for man of the match. And I think he's going to go from strength to strength. We asked this question on the Gore stream yesterday, but I'm going to ask it again. How much do you think he's actually worth? Now, the biggest worry about Aina for me is that he's only on a 1-year deal. And I think talks need to start happening right now, this very second, to get that contract extended. There is absolutely no harm in getting it done. And I think he's shown that he's more than worthy of it now. So let me ask a second question here. Would you look to extend Ola Aina's contract now? Or do you think we've got too many fullbacks? Let me know in the comments down below. But as far as I'm concerned, he is S Club 7 list for me. He is an absolute steal at free, and maybe one of the best free transfers we've had at Nottingham Forest, if not the Premier League. Am I going overboard on him? Maybe, but I was just so impressed with him yesterday. But what do you guys think? All right, let's move on and talk about the goalkeeper situation. And for me, this is an interesting one because I thought Vlachodimos was fantastic yesterday. Yes, he wasn't troubled much by the Villa strike force of Wally Watkins and Diaby, who I rate as probably one of the signings of the season. But that was probably because the defense was so strong in front of him. But I just think he brings that composure and that respect and that calmness. And I think he is a #1. Look, I said yesterday, what Cooper said in his post-match interview was probably one of the best interviews I've heard him do. The whole time we've been back in the Premier League. And I liked what he said about Turner. He didn't throw him under the bus. But I don't actually believe it's because he didn't make the change because of the mess up at the Liverpool game. It was inevitable that it was going to happen. And now Vlachodimos stepped in and the number 1 shirt is his to lose. And I think he will become sustained in that position. I said in the summer that Turner was brought in as a number 2 because the original plan was to bring Henderson in as the number 1. And once the Henderson whole injury debacle took its toll, then Vlachodimos was signed in as the number 1. And I've actually been surprised that it's taken that long to bring him in. What I will say, whoever is number 1, I have nothing against Turner. I think he's been pretty damn solid, especially in the first 4 or 5 games of the season. But I don't think we have a keeper problem anymore. And what do I mean by this? If you look at the last 12 months or so where we had Henderson, then we had to get Navas, these were all lone keepers. And now both of these keepers are players we own. And I think that's a point that a lot of people are glossing over, because it doesn't really matter who number 1 is now, because whoever's performing can go in. And come the end of the season, we don't need to get the old shopping list back out looking for yet more keepers. So that for me is extremely important. But I do, and I still stand by what I said at the start of the season, that Vlachodimos should be and will be the number 1. And now that he's in there, I think he's going to stay. But what do you guys think? Who should be the number 1 for you? Okay, let's move on and talk about Steve Cooper, and let's give our props to Cooper. Irregardless of what people say about me or the channel or what have you, I will still say the same thing, and I don't really give a shit what people say. But we will always praise where praise is due and criticize where criticism is due. And that's our stance. If people don't like it or want to read too deeply into it, that's their agenda and their business. I couldn't really care less. But we will continue to talk honestly about what we see on the pitch. And what I saw yesterday was absolutely spot on. From the team selection to the tactics to the substitutions to there was just something in the air. It was one of those in the air kind of games you felt. And you felt that if Villa had stayed on there, even if the Forest players had gone off at the end of the game, they still wouldn't have scored a goal. It just had that feeling about it. But Steve Cooper deserves a lot of praise for the performance yesterday. He was really under pressure. Like the results, the ones they'd messed up against Luton, those things, they were on him. He's not alone though in the blame game. The players had a responsibility in those matches to perform. Doesn't matter if the subs were good enough or not. The players that came on should have stepped up. But in this game in particular, I don't think he put a foot wrong. And I mean that from start to finish. Normally you could find, a couple of niggly things that you could complain about even after a win. But this performance for me, although the Arsenal one will always go down in my heart as that passionate one, that big one and what have you, where we beat them 1-0, this one for me was a complete performance from start to finish. And it starts with Cooper and it ended with the players on the pitch. And I think that we are now starting to see maybe the beginnings of a settled team. Because that's the one thing you could say that's been missing. There's been a lot of chopping and changings pretty much since we've come into the Premier League. And now there was real signs on that pitch of balance, of cohesion, of, interchangeable play between the players. And that's only a good thing. You got to add, though, Emery played right into Cooper's preferred hand. He really did with that high line, giving Cooper half a pitch to get that ball into. Cooper would have been loving it. And I think, as I mentioned, his post-match was absolutely spot on. I feel it was the first time this season where he just spoke clearly without any media training or media lines or the usual stuff we hear about, this, that, and the other for his go-to lines. And it was endearing to hear those comments. He just talked tactically about football. He talked about Turner. I thought he spoke about the goalkeeping situation really well. And that's what I want to hear from him going forward. I don't want to hear about this stuff, where it's stick to the plan, we'll improve, we'll learn, That's all the usual stuff. What I want to hear from him going forward is exactly how he did that post-match. That for me was his best post-match, and that for me was arguably his best game as a manager in the Premier League to date. But what do you guys think? All right, so let's move on to the fourth talking point. And for me, this is actually quite an important one. And it's the centre-back pairing that we have. Are Murillo and Niakate our best pairing now? And I think this is a hard one to answer because I think there's going to be a lot of recency bias when it comes to this. Now, I've always been Niakate's biggest fan. Go back 2 years ago, or when is it, 18 months ago, when we signed him. And I said he'd probably be our best signing of that summer. And then run it forward from his injury and the lies that was spread about him, where certain people were saying that Niakate was trying to extend his injury period, that he could have been back a lot more recent than he actually was. All these BS lies about him. And then he's bided his time this season getting into the team. And I think his performance yesterday was nothing short of brilliant. Playing on the wrong side of the centre-back line, he usually prefers to play on the left side. And for me, he didn't have the captain's armband on yesterday, but he acted like one. He, of course, was made his captain before he joined Nottingham Forest. And that pairing with him and Murillo, I think is the way forward. And I'm not using recency bias here at all. I'm looking at their attributes. Both are strong, both are pacey. And the key one for me are both can progress the ball forward by dribbling it out and looking for those short passes or balls in behind. Yes, they can be prone to the odd mistake. And yes, that partnership needs to flourish. But I think this could be the way forward currently. I think the likes of Felipe, as much as I love him, I don't know what's going on with him, guys. I've heard nothing from the guys I talk to. But we see him on the training pitch videos all the time. It looks like he's a coach now rather than an actual player. And that may not be a bad thing, especially if he helps develop Murillo. But we have to talk about Bolly. For me, I've said all this season, Bolly has been our most consistent and probably best player so far. But his attributes are that stone wallness, that brick wall that stops players getting through. A guy who doesn't miss a tackle, who clears the ball beautifully and is really hard to get around. But if Forest want to progress their style of play, then maybe this partnership is the way forward. What I will say on it is, yes, I do think this is currently our best partnership. But I think it needs a few more games before we judge it to see how it develops and flourishes. And then let's not forget Omar Bamidele still sitting in the wing, waiting for his opportunity. That may come because let's not forget the African Cup of Nations is not that far now, and Niakate will be going to it. And therefore, we do need a secondary option with Murillo. But what do you guys think? Who is your preferred centre-back pairing now? And are you using recency bias or are you looking at their attributes? Alrighty, let's move on to the final point, and that for me is almost Goldberg settings. Not who's next, but what's next for Nottingham Forest. Can we kick on from this performance? And this is actually going to be quite important because, look, let's not get ahead of ourselves. It's probably the best way for me to say this. We've got a tough game coming up at the weekend with West Ham. We'll be doing that fatal four-way, me and Ant and Lawless and Chase. Oh my God, I don't even want to know how that's going to sound or look. But looking ahead after that, we got Brighton, we got Everton, and then maybe a couple of winnable games until we then hit Spurs, which is a big one for me. But what I want to say is Cooper nailed that game yesterday. But for me, his struggle still is against those teams in and around us. I've always said he prefers to play those harder oppositions where we can be the underdog. I want to see what happens against West Ham, a low block counter-attacking team. I think it's going to be a fascinating battle. We'll get into that more towards the end of the week. But what are the expectations now? I don't think they've changed. But what I think is that win yesterday puts us more in line with where we should be. As I keep saying, I believe Forest have the 11th strongest squad in the Premier League. So 11th would be par. Anything above or minus that is probably where we should be, there or thereabouts. And that's exactly where we are, obviously, before Chelsea have kicked off today. But can Forest kick on and maybe push for the top 10? Because that is clearly what Marinakis wants to do. I think these next few games are going to be critical to finding out if this team is starting to gel, or was this Aston Villa game a flash in the pan? Whatever happens, we know for sure as Forest fans, we're in for a roller coaster. not just of a journey, but of emotions as well. The ups, the downs, you'd think would be used to it by now, but you just never are. But get your thoughts in. Where do you think Forest will now end up at the end of this season, and in what position will they finish? And don't forget, tonight at 7, Beat the Drop is back. Oh, there are some scores to settle on that one tonight. If you haven't already, please don't forget to hit that like button. Subscribe to Forest Fan TV if you are new, and we'll see you tonight at 7. Come on, you Reds.